Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Connie the Goat here once again. Today we're going to be talking about universal joints as they pertain to prop shaft, aka drive shaft, in a rear-wheel drive vehicle, or it doesn't matter. Anything that's got a U-joint has limits. If you've driven an older four-wheel drive that has U-joint front axles, you've felt what I'm about to talk about in terms of the limits, because you can't turn a four-wheel drive with U-joints very well. Even with CVs, it's a little better, but with U-joints it's still a problem because you're trying to turn them and you're exceeding the limits. So what we've got here is just a 1/2-inch Craftsman socket. It's not the best analog, but it's pretty good. A normal U-joint is going to have both rotation axes on the same plane because it's a T. They're flat. This is offset, but it's still the same because a U-joint has two axes of play. So we'll just pretend that this end is the pinion, the drive, or the transmission. It really doesn't matter, and the other end is the drive shaft. So in a perfect world, or in an independent rear car with a torque tube, you've got a zero angle and everything turns in unison and everything's happy, and torque tube is really the only application where you can have a true zero angle. A U-joint, normal automotive U-joint, has needle bearings inside the caps, between the caps and the cross, and those do have to move, and they don't move much, and we'll get to that. But when they move, because there's an angle there, and if you've used a wobble like this, you felt this too. At a limit, it's hard to turn. If you get it bound up like that, you can't hardly turn it and maintain it in plane. This is what happens when U-joints break. They lock up, they bind, they snap. But because they have to turn, there's an acceleration moment, because you're changing. I mean, even if it's a degree, 2 degrees, 3 degrees, whatever, there's going to be an acceleration moment, and if things are moving, they're going to have to accelerate. Even if it's briefly, if it moves, it accelerated. Okay? And force is acceleration times mass. This is all very important to us. So we've got just a slight amount of movement, and I'll move over here to my other demo that I've got set up in my fancy new workshop. Not fancy, it's just a room in my house where I can do dirty things with cars and engines. Alright, so we've got a wobble, and again, these are off-plane wobbles because that's how wobbles are. And see, this one's kind of loose. And then I've just got a hole, a bolt, so that I can react with it. And if it'll stay square, see, nothing's really turning as far as this alignment. But if you cock it just a little bit, I mean, it's really hard to keep keep this in plane. Okay? Because what's happening is we've got a pair of joints, and this is analog to our drive shaft. We've got a pair of joints. As we're turning, okay, one joint's accelerating, the other is decelerating, and they're paired. As long as the angles are the same, those forces will cancel, because you've got an accelerant and a decelerant. So the force on the drive shaft is going to be canceled out because one end's accelerating, the other end's decelerating. If you have, like a truck that I'll discuss later, you have a drive shaft that's set up with its angles wrong, like so. Because a normal drive shaft, you've got, you know, you're either coming up, you're coming down, you're coming sideways. but the angles are set up to cancel. Okay, now we'll just say 3 degrees here. Good. 3 degrees bad because it doesn't cancel. You've got a positive angle and a negative angle. Here you've got different. They've got to go different ways to get the cancellation, because this way you're going to have accelerate, accelerate, decelerate, decelerate, instead of accelerate, decelerate, decelerate, accelerate. Make any sense? Don't worry about it. Trust me, I'm right. So that's what we've got. And they don't want to stay. They really would much rather, it would be so much easier for a U-joint to just say, screw it, I'm jumping out of here, I'm taking my ball and I'm going home. Because they do not want to turn smoothly and stay in their respective planes. So there's that. You have to check the angles. You have to check the angles, because they've got to be equal. Very basic tool. Lowe's has these. Summit has something for $10. It's just an angle gauge. Can't focus, but it's just an angle gauge. However this turns, that's the angle. Empty pop can. Right? Simulates our drive shaft. Well, suppose I should put it upside down, right? You stick that on the drive shaft, then you measure the angle. Okay, coming down, this would be a 10-degree down angle. Don't worry about the numbers. The 90's flat. 90's probably what your torque tube would be at. Okay, so you got a drive shaft now. You got a 10-degree down angle. Okay. So, bringing back our U-joint, our drive shaft, I'm going to take this extension off. Bringing this guy back in. Alright, so we measure him. .65, so we're going to call that a 35-degree down angle. Okay? You got your transmission up here. This is the transmission yoke, U-joint, drive shaft yoke, U-joint, okay? So this is the transmission yoke. This would be the input shaft. Try something smaller. This, it's magnetic. This would be the input shaft, output shaft of the transmission. Goes in there, right? So that's the center line for the transmission. The output shaft is the center line for how this joint is going to turn, just like the drive shaft is the center line for that. So we've got a 35, and then we're just going to throw this on here. And it's all sorts of wrong, but again, we're just playing. We've got 90, so we've got a 0 angle going down to a 35 angle, right? Because we're checking, we're worried about comparing the axis of the transmission to the axis of the drive shaft, and we've got a 35-degree angle, which is way too much for any normal U-joint. We'll get to that. And then we need to find, this will be the differential pinion yoke. Okay, differential flange. It doesn't matter. Whatever the U-joint connects its ass to is great. Okay. So we put that on there, and again, we're at a 0 angle. So we've got 0, 35, 0. So these angles will cancel. Okay. If you've got this situation, which again I saw today, we've got this situation. Our drive shaft's at 0, and we're 55 down, and 45 up. This is going to shake like a dog shit in peach seeds. Because again, go out in your toolkit. Go out in your toolkit, get some wobbles and extensions, and just try to turn. If you haven't already experienced this in your wrenching life, try to turn it. It's not going to want to turn. Well, you put 200 to 400 foot-pounds of a vehicle to it, it's going to try. It's really going to try. And it's just going to lock up, turn, and pitch a fit. So, we have this tool for measuring angle. And I'll post some pictures later on GTO Forum. I'll put the link in the comments or description or something. We've got pictures of how this all goes together. And you just measure the angles and do the math. And there's two. You've got, your horizontal, right? Like you're looking down the side of the vehicle underneath and you see this, right? Okay, and that looks good. But then you get under the vehicle and you look at it and oh shit, it's cockeyed. Okay. Alright, now if we're going to measure, like I said, we got to have our horizontal angle and our lateral angles have to be good. So we're going to pretend that this is our lateral angle. So what I've got here is just a laser bore sight. It's actually a handgun tool. Just a laser pointer. And in my toolkit, I don't have it here at home. I've got little bit of neodymium speaker magnets that I ripped out of some Bose speakers, and they fit great on the end of the U-joint cap. And this is exaggerated, but what that allows me to do is take my laser pointer and stick it on the U-joint cap, and then I can take my laser pointer on the other U-joint cap and it will tell me what the angle is if I get the length. You got to get the length, and then it's basic trig from there. Okay, does that make sense? And because of what is this, transverse property, this angle here and this angle here, here it is. Alright, so we've got our drive shaft of X length, and we've got a 90-degree angle here. Right angle trig, real easy, because we know what this length is. We know what this length is. That'll tell us what that angle is with SOHCAHTOA. SOHCAHTOA. Opposite over hypotenuse. Opposite hypotenuse. So if we take the sine of this angle, or the sine of these over these, that will tell us what our angle is. Okay. And again, we're trying to stay within 0. Now, say you've got something silly going on where you've got, this situation where things are really just, cockeyed. Well, then you're going to have to take an additional measurement. But it's still not that hard. Failing that, you can measure the known points on the vehicle, and you can always come around and measure the other side, because they should be the same or close to it if you reverse, obviously. It actually works out pretty well, because those lateral angles can be hard, and you've got to have somewhere in the system, either horizontally or laterally, half a degree minimum. But the rub is you don't want too much. 3 degrees is really the optimum. I'm sorry, not optimum, maximum. 3 degrees is the maximum. The maximum for a U-joint. It's not much. It's really not. And I wish I had one. Tried to find it, can't. Just get a U-joint, play with it, and you'll see how Like $3. Go to Napa. Don't even necessarily have to pay $3. Like, hey, this guy on the internet said I need to go play with a U-joint. So just let me play with one. And just, feel how it articulates. It doesn't take much. It really doesn't. And if you don't give it enough, though, they break. Just when they've gotten that momentary bump and they've been running at a low angle. You got to have at least half a degree. GM, historically, has tilted the engine down. That's why when you look at a GM 350 intake manifold sitting on your bench, there's a slope to where the carburetor bolts to. Well, that's because that's level when it's in the car because the back of the engine tilts down. You extend the transmission out, it tilts down. And then the differential's down even lower. So that puts the U-joints with that minimum half degree operating angle. So GM tilts it down. Chrysler had a nasty habit of cocking the engine to the side. Okay? And anybody who's ever tried to work on the spark plugs for a 5 liter or 3.8 and the last generation of what most people consider the Thunderbird, not the little Lincoln Jaguar retro piece of crap, but the last Thunderbird or Mustang or whatever, Ford offsets theirs to the side, making the passenger side plug such a joy in life. So you kind of need to know what the original setup for the vehicle was to know what you look, because you may get it under a Chrysler, but oh shit, that drive shaft's crooked. Well, it's supposed to be, because when you put the angle gauge on it horizontally, it's going to be very close to flat. It gets its half degree or so operating angle minimum from being to the side. Same thing with Ford. So you got Ford is offset. Okay. GM tilts it down. Chrysler tilts it, cocks it the other way. So at the end of the day, Ford and Chrysler are going to look a lot alike because they're both offset to the side. It's GM that tilts them down, which works great. That's it for this section. We'll put up some pictures, we'll talk about it, and I don't know, we'll go from there. Out.